Well, good day to you on this Wednesday in the middle of June. I'm wanting to rename these sessions going forward as Wednesday Walks Together. Part of the challenge of lockdown has been the fact that we haven't been able to be physically together, and we've had to find other ways to do this. My name is Mark Long, rector of the parish of St Andrew in Newlands, Cape Town. I'd like to focus today on a short passage from the Gospel of John, John chapter 6, verses 8 to 9. Context of the feeding of the crowds. One of Jesus' disciples, Andrew, who happened to be Simon Peter's brother, said to Jesus, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they amongst so many people?" Now, one of the challenges, I think, of this lockdown has been the economic impact on so many people's lives. And for many at this time, scraping together the last few bits of their lives to try and hold things together. Or perhaps one has had other resources, and I'm very thankful that Dawn has remained employed through this time and the church has been able to continue to pay me. So I'm not scratching too much, except perhaps in terms of trying to keep our children going at the moment. But aware that there are times in our lives where, on one level, there's an abundance of a whole lot and a scarcity of other things. For Jesus and the disciples, an abundance of people and an abundance of hunger and not sufficient food. And Jesus gives his disciple the challenge of going and finding food for the crowds. And they found this young chap with his barley loaves, but clearly totally insufficient to the apparent need. One of the gifts, though, of acknowledging what we do have is that we begin to see the potential for what can happen. And Jesus is able to do that. Where Andrew looks at these barley loaves and thinks, not a chance, Jesus says, here's an opportunity. And so we discover that, in fact, these barley loaves feed the crowds. And what it does is it ignites a generosity in others. This young chap with his few loaves, probably the food he had for himself over the next few days, a willingness to share that, to give it away. And that ignited this generosity in others. Padraig Tuama, in his book, Daily Prayer with the Coromila Community, in a little prayer that relates to this verse, says the following. He says, generosity listened. And I love that phrase because there is within each of us a deep desire, I think, to be generous. We can hoard, we can hold back, but underneath it all, we do know how wonderful it is to actually give things away and to see the joy on the faces of others as they receive it, or just to know that personal joy of knowing that one no longer is responsible for whatever it is one's giving away. And so in the context of the crowd and the need, these barley loaves become that key to others' generosity. And we see the results of that if you read on in that particular chapter in John's Gospel. What is it that we are perhaps feeling is a scarcity at this point in our lives? What are we feeling a little overwhelmed with? For myself at the moment, it's just probably having taken on too much and feeling that not quite sure where to turn at various moments of the day. But discovering that somehow what seems to be a scarcity of time in dealing with it all, somehow there's a generosity in that scarcity, and there seems to be sufficient time to do what needs to happen. So I would encourage you, I don't know where you are at this point as lockdown begins to open up a bit. Certainly for us in the Western Cape, the numbers in terms of infections and deaths are climbing concerningly. And so on one level, there's a whole lot that's far too generous in a destructive way in our lives at the moment. And perhaps not enough of what really is generous. And my question, I think, today, in terms of other issues I've been dealing with, is how do we shift to not being overcome by whatever the difficulty of the moment or the day is. And how do we move into a space where we ourselves begin to experience that generosity and begin to once again be creative in the way we deal with life and deal with relationship? And I think there's a need just to be both honest and vulnerable in exploring that. Being honest as to actually what the concerns are that sit on our shoulders, that weigh us down at the moment. But also in acknowledging that, as Jesus so clearly was able to look beyond it and to see the possibility and the potential of the situation. So yes, there's a lot that may be holding you, and there may be huge amounts of fear or levels of anxiety that you're not quite sure what to do with at the moment. But maybe there's a friend, maybe there's someone you can share that with and to encourage you to do that. But also, what is it that you are able to give? What am I able to give to others that may just be that source of hope, that may ignite that generosity, that may allow generosity in our own lives, in our families, in our communities, just to be sparked, that generosity may truly listen.